welcome to today's webinar, in which we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics, and that is how to establish a service management office. In the next 30 minutes, I'll take you through some of the key design factors and design criteria that you need to think about when establishing an SMO. I hope you find this session useful. And before we get started, let me introduce a few things about the logistics and a little bit about myself. My name is Jan-Willem, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Cybiant, a company that specializes in agentic automation and automated service delivery. I'm also the author of the Service Automation Framework, which is globally recognized as an industry reference for enterprise automation strategy. I have over 15 years of experience in IT services and particularly service management, and I've been a teacher for ITIL and COVID for many, many years. If you want to reach out to me after today's session, feel free to reach out to me to the email that you see depicted on this slide. I'd always love to hear back from people who have viewed today's session. So what I've prepared for today is a session in which we're going to talk about all of the key structural aspects of the SMO. But before we dive into that, just a few quick notes about today's logistics. Note that today's webinar is recorded, and you will receive a link to the full recording within 24 hours after the session completed. The benefit of attending sessions like these live is that you have the opportunity to share questions and ideas with the fellow participants. We're using the Teams edition of the webinar software. So to the top of your screen, you will find a Q&A box, and I strongly encourage you to put all your questions there. I will moderate all of the questions towards the end, and if you want, we can also unmute yourself so you can ask a question in person. Also note that we will make copies of all the slides available. There's no need to make screenshots or photos of the slides, because we will be sharing that to all the people who are listening today. Good, so let's get started. What are we going to talk about today? For today's session, we're going to dive in detail into the concept of a service management office. What is it, and what is one of the key reasons to establish one? We will also look at the key differences between a service management office and a project management office, because this always raises a lot of questions. I'll end today's session with a few best practices and key pieces of advice on how you can structure an SMO in a proper structure. And we'll look at some of the lessons learned over the years. I'll end today's session with a Q&A where you can ask all of the questions that I just mentioned. So again, please feel free to put these in the chat. So let's get started with a fundamental definition. What is it that we're talking about when we're talking about a service management office? Most importantly, it's important to see that an SMO is a governance structure. It enables an organization to coordinate its ITSM initiatives as well as continual improvement capabilities in a centralized organizational function. So that it's no longer isolated across the organization, but all the knowledge is combined within this SMO. Now, I fully understand that might sound vague at this moment, because what do we mean with establishing governance, continual improvements, policies, and standards? Well, think about it this way. A service management office is a team of people that is responsible for ensuring the quality of IT services. And this can be done in a variety of different ways. First and foremost, the SMO is involved with setting the standards and policies that the rest of the organization and all of the other IT services need to adhere to. Secondly, you can think about it as a place of knowledge collection, where people come together and knowledge is being shared and transferred to other people in the organization. And thirdly, and maybe most importantly, it's a place where continual improvement begins. The SMO ultimately is responsible for not just managing the day-to-day service delivery, but ensuring that the quality of service goes up over time. So now that you understand some of the fundamental reasons why an SMO is important, let's dive a little bit deeper and explain a little bit more in detail why more and more organizations are establishing a service management office these days. I fully realize that the next slide is a little bit complex, but what you see on this picture is an overview of a development that is happening in almost every IT service delivery organization worldwide. And that is the CM movement, short for Service Integration and Management. As more and more IT service providers specialize, most organizations start a collaboration with different external vendors, which are represented by the blue boxes that you see at the bottom of the slide. These service providers deliver services to an organization. And as a result, an IT services division that used to be an internally organized function is moving towards the role of the integrator. So what does that mean for everyone in practice? It means that as an IT service provision organization, you need to establish a service desk, reporting, technology, and tools in order to manage all of those different vendors. But maybe even more importantly, it establishes the need for a proper governance structure. And that is the box that you see on the right, which I will highlight now in another color, so that you see where a service management office is placed as part of a wider organization. Because of this role and transformation to a service integration organization, it's fair to say that most organizations these days need a service management office. It's no longer possible to do everything by yourself, and it's up to the SMO to ensure that there is sufficient enough time and opportunity to manage all of those different vendors. A little bit later, I will cover more details around what the SMO or how an SMO can be structured. But for now, I'd like you to see that this is the middle layer between the other business units, which you see at the top, and the different service providers that you see at the bottom. Most importantly, an SMO is responsible for IT service management, vendor management, and IT governance. And I'll peel off those layers a little bit more in detail. Most organizations choose to set up an SMO internally, whereas the service providers can be external organizations. Good, because of these three different layers, the strategic business partners, internal or external at the top, as we've just seen, the service providers and vendors at the bottom, as we've also just seen at the bottom layer, there is a need for a layer that integrates those external service providers, bundle them, control them, and then offer services to the rest of the organization. And that is exactly where the Service Management Office, or SMO, comes in. So now that you're a little bit more familiar of where this function needs to be positioned, and that the whole integration movement is actually triggering and propelling the establishment of an SMO forward, let's dive a little bit more deeper into some of its key objectives. One of the main aspects that an SMO executes and establishes on a day-to-day basis is to function as a knowledge hub. Many of you who are watching today will have been involved with different frameworks over different times, most notably ITIL for ITSM or COBIT for IT governance. But as you also might have seen, one of the key challenges with these frameworks is to assign proper ownerships. In the past, we called this, and we found solutions through service owners or product owners or even process owners. But with an SMO, you can very clearly define a functional unit in an organization that takes ownership of its frameworks. And that means also ownership for the underlying processes that are within this. In case you're interested in this and learning more about ITIL and COBIT, note that I've already delivered a few webinars in previous years. So I would strongly encourage you to look up on YouTube and find some of these sessions, which will give you an introduction to IT service management or IT governance. So one of the key aspects is to ensure that the SMO takes care and ownership of these frameworks. A second key objective is then to establish processes and improve process quality over time across different vendors and across different functions. Most organizations piece together different services and solutions together and then deliver that as a service to the rest of the organization. And that means that processes like incident management, problem or change might need to collaborate across multiple different vendors and multiple different functions. By establishing an SMO, you can centralize process quality, set metrics and SLAs, and monitor them over time. So it forms a single reporting hub that measures quality of services end to end. And then last but not least, why it's important to establish an SMO as a function is because otherwise there's no accountability for the experience that the organization builds up over time. By combining a number of people into a group, it ensures that knowledge is properly stored and that it's clear for everyone where knowledge about specific processes, practices, and IT governance functions is actually placed within the organization. So this is a reason why I strongly recommend establishing this as an organizational function or as a team within the company. Now, as we've just seen, an SMO is a central function in an organization, but one of the most important aspects in which I always try to explain the properties and the scope of the SMO is that it should follow an approach of assurance or IT governance. And that means that the SMO should control and verify, but should not be in the operational driver's seat. It should establish the processes and control the metrics, but it should not get involved in the day-to-day operational activities like solving tickets, handling incidents, or execution of projects. It is really an assurance and governance function, a quality control layer that is placed as a middle layer in the organization and that oversees the services that are provided by vendors, third parties, or sometimes even internal teams. So one of the difficulties that I've experienced in establishing SMOs in different organizations is that people who are in operational jobs or have been for a very long time need to let go. They need to let go of the day-to-day execution work and start moving towards a role of quality assurance, vendor management, and ensuring that metrics and reports are being generated and acted upon instead of starting to solve problems by themselves. So an SMO is really a quality assurance role instead of a firefighter role. And that is one of the hardest parts in establishing a good service management office, is that people need to change their behavior and the way that they collaborate with each other in order to achieve this. So think about it as a unit that does QA without being actually in the driving seat. Good. There are different ways to establish this, and this is where SMOs become really interesting. If there would be one uniform way in which a service management office should be established, it would have been very simple, because then we could just write it down into an operating model or into a blueprint, and then every organization could copy that blueprint from beginning to end, and it would all work perfectly. The reality, however, is much more difficult because there is no one size fits all. One of the key challenges, or if you ask me, the interesting points, is that every organization needs to establish its own SMO operating model. I'd like to call this ensuring that there is the right capabilities at the right place. And whatever way you would like to structure it, there is no one size fits all. You always need to adjust and tailor this to the size, geographical distribution, industry, and towards which particular services IT needs to deliver to the rest of the organization. On this slide, you see three common operating models. Organizations can start with a lightweight SMO, which just handles the day-to-day, federated across multiple different vendors and projects, or centralized, which owns the standards, coordination, IT processes, and IT governance control. Most organizations start at the left with establishing a lightweight SMO, generally driven by one or two people, and move to a federated and ultimately centralized function. In my experience, I've seen that over time, a centralized function and centralized operating model works best because it establishes clear ownership in any kind of organization. And over time, that SMO starts to become the knowledge hub for everything IT service related and becomes the sounding board for the rest of the organization. Now, since there is no just one way in which you can establish an SMO, I thought it would be interesting to show today more of an example of how you could construct one. And I know that this goes already a little bit more in detail, but in case you are in the process of establishing an SMO or thinking about establishing one, I think this operating model will greatly help you. The model basically works from top to bottom and establishes some of the major ITSM domains and the way that this can be supported. For those of you who are familiar with some of the basic ITIL and ITSM terminology, you can see some wording that is or should be very familiar. At the top, requests from end users come in. This can be in the form of questions, which relates to knowledge management, in the form of requests, which is obviously service request management, in the form of incidents or tickets, which is better known as incidents, or a request to have a change or something improved in a service, which is a CSI request. From those different users, generally an IT service management process starts. And there is first and foremost an interface, which you see depicted in the area in pink, where someone communicates with the rest of the service delivery organization through chat, phone, email, through a portal, or maybe even walk-in. And then the design of an SMO actually starts. Across this picture, you see the 4 different tiers of service delivery, where tier 0 here is defined as virtual agents and self-service, which is becoming more and more standardized, which is the non-human way to interface and solve questions. I'm not going to dive too much into that today, but the whole concept of self-help, self-service, and service automation are really a transformational approach in a layer 0, tier 0 aspect that is put into modern service management organizations. And then beneath that, there's the traditional tier 1, which is service desk, tier 2, which is typically level 2 support and expert support, or tier 3 specialist vendors and more complex support issues, which is the normal operating model in every organization. So where do you see an SMO? SMO is what you can see on the right-hand side. The SMO team needs to coordinate across the 4 different tiers and across the multiple different vendors that exist, and that will all need to work together to ultimately deliver those services towards the end consumer. The SMO team, and as we've just seen in the previous slide, it is typically organized as a function, is therefore responsible for establishing the right processes. And as you can see, here we already make a link towards IT service management and ITIL, where the SMO team takes ownership for incident management, problem management, request, knowledge management, or in this case, CSI. You would need to tailor this obviously to your own organization and the number of processes that you would need to establish. Secondly, the SMO team is then responsible for IT governance, ensuring that the right controls are in place so that the different vendors, as well as the processes, adhere to policies, best practices, and the direction that the organization is establishing. And also establish the verification around that. Thirdly, the SMO's team can only know if they are delivering proper services if there are proper reports and metrics in place. And this is where the reporting aspect comes in. As an SMO team, you would like to have the dashboards and metrics in place so that at all times you have real-time information around the way that IT services are being delivered and that you can act upon that. And this is exactly why good service management systems should underpin any SMO. What I also personally always strongly recommend is that the SMO team takes ownership of the service management tool. Think about the different tools that are available. Somebody needs to manage this. And you generally don't want to let this be managed by a third-party vendor. and want to build up in-house capabilities, maybe supported by a technical vendor, but ownership of the ITSM tool should always be with the SMO team. Fourthly, the SMO team is responsible for vendor management, managing the different suppliers and vendors that together form the services that are delivered towards the organization. Here you can think about outsourcing of, let's say, service desk and agents, or maybe even outsourcing of the IT asset management or knowledge management operations. All of these are existing vendor structures that need to be managed centrally because they can have a direct impact on the quality of services. And then last but not least, and this directly ties back to reporting and vendor management, it is up to the SMO to ensure that SLAs and experience level agreements are properly managed, measured, and acted upon. And that means hosting and holding service reviews with different vendors and constantly pressing on increasing the quality of service. Now, the reason I wanted to share this operating model today is because it provides you with an overview of how a potential SMO can be set up, including its roles and responsibilities. But I'd like to reiterate one of the points that I made earlier. Every SMO for every organization is unique. And although this example can be a good blueprint to get started and start a discussion in your own organization, note that every SMO operating model will need to be tailored and will need to be adjusted over time. Good. So now that we know a little bit about that, let's look at some of the key differences, because I know there's a lot of misconceptions between the role of an SMO, a PMO, which stands for Project Management Office, and the traditional service desk. And I hope that you slowly start to see that these are really distinctly different things with different functions. Let me first explain the most important difference between the Service Management Office and the service desk. As we have seen in the slides before, the service desk is the interface between the end users and the rest of the organization. It handles the day-to-day incidents, requests, tickets that are coming in, and make sure that service is being delivered towards users as quickly as possible. Note that the service desk as such has a very operational objective. And that operational objective ensures that customer service is being delivered quickly. However, where the SMO comes in is that it plays this role of assurance, making sure that the service desk is supported by different vendors and that the different vendors work properly together. So SMO has much more of a governance objective, whereas the service desk has a much more operational objective. The service desk delivers services day to day, whereas the SMO is a much more tactical and strategic organization that safeguards the quality of services over the longer term and ensures continual service improvement initiatives are properly executed. And then last but not least, let's consider the SMO versus the Project Management Office. Just one letter difference, but a completely different meaning. A PMO is project focused, meaning that it helps organizations establish and realize projects from beginning to end. But as you probably know about projects, a project always has a start date and an end date. So it's by definition a temporary organization. And once one project is finished, we move on towards supporting the next project. Service Management Office is different in the sense that it will never stop. It's an ongoing function that is strategic and ongoing and continually tries to improve things over time. So it's not just a one-time thing. And that really is one of the most critical differences between PMO, SMO, and the service desk. So I'm getting towards the end of my session today, and I hope that in this short 30 minutes that we have together, I've given you a proper introduction to the key concept of what an SMO is, why it's important, and why it should be established. One of the most important things that I'd like you to take away from this session is summarized in this final slide. One of the key reasons why SMOs are so important today is because the world of IT services is moving towards a service integrator model, which I depicted through the CM picture. And that means that a service delivery organization moves more and more towards a service integration role. There's very many reasons for this, but most importantly, it is because different companies specialize in different things, and supporting organization cannot have knowledge in all those things combined. And because organizations are shifting to this service integrator role, you need to have a way in order to manage and coordinate those different vendors. And this is exactly where the SMO comes in. Establishing an SMO gives you control over your vendors. It establishes proper processes and governance structures, and it centralizes knowledge around IT services in one central location. As such, an SMO should be strategic, and it should have ownership, first and foremost, over the ITSM processes that have been selected and that need to be coordinated. Here, think about the standard ITIL processes, instant problem change, and there's many, many more that need an owner. And the SMO is the primary location and place where that ownership and accountability can be placed. Secondly, it also forms the primary interface for IT governance, and establishing the right and proper controls, showcasing and establishing which policies need to be adhered to and how that's being done. An SMO would be the perfect place for that. Thirdly, an SMO should own performance management, the measurement of SLAs or experience level agreements, measuring these, reporting on this on a day-to-day basis, and then following up with the different vendors in order to ensure that that quality gets better over time. And last but not least, it should own vendor relationship management for the suppliers that are delivering towards the SMO and towards that integration layer. Vendor relationship management is a critical function within the SMO, and managing the vendors is an important role that the SMO plays. So now that you know why an SMO is important, why it frequently needs to be established, and what some of its key responsibilities are, I'd like to leave you with the last key takeaway. Every SMO requires an operating model. And what I've shown you in today's session is that each of those operating models will need to be tailored to individual organizations. There's no one size fits all. And it requires a bit of work to ensure that you can make an SMO, but then also embed it and then establish an operating model so that it also works on a day-to-day basis. So I hope that that provides you some of the more detailed insights behind the SMO, and that in this last 30 minutes, you've learned something new. This brings me towards the end of my presentation. I'll open up for a few ending questions before we move towards a close. Let's see if any questions came in. Good, let's have a look. Good, one of the first questions that I see coming in is, well, our organization is looking to establish an SMO, where do we start? I think that that's a very excellent question. I think that the starting point is always getting buy-in for the establishment of an SMO. The reason that this is important is that if there is no management commitment or no buy-in, then it's going to be very difficult to establish this. So start with having the mandate and a proper charter to establish an SMO right from the start. It's a very good question. Second question here is, our organization is on ServiceNow. Can we still establish an SMO? That's a very good question. So what I hope that you start to see is that an SMO is vendor independent. It is not tied to any technology. It is literally an operating model. And that means that you can establish this with any kind of service management tool and any kind of technology. So yes, if you're on the ServiceNow platform, you can obviously do this, but there's also possible to establish an SMO with any other kind of tool. So note that this is a vendor independent approach, and it's more about establishing an organization and operating model than it is about the technology. Where the technology obviously comes back is in the part that I established around reporting on SLAs and XLAs. Having a good tool will definitely help you to have more insights, real-time reporting, and therefore also have the facts straight in terms of the aspects that need to be delivered. Good, some very good questions. Thank you so much for that. That always helps a lot and makes it very interactive. Good, I think we're getting towards the end. With that, I would like to thank you for taking the time to join our webinars. In case you're interested in this and learning more around service management, governance, and automation, please follow our calendar. We host these webinars very frequently in various different topics. So thank you so much for being here with us today. Hope you found this session useful, and I look forward to seeing you again in any of our upcoming sessions. Thank you so much.